Are you getting tired of all the back and forth about is meat bad for you? Is meat not bad for you? Especially red meat. Is processed meat bad for you? Is it not bad for you? Seems like there's been a series of articles and studies being published that really go one way or the other. And I can see how that could just drive people crazy and say, what am I supposed to do when it comes to eating meat? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com. And interestingly, although we could see this from a negative light about all this back and forth, I actually think it highlights some really positive aspects of things that we can take away about nutritional science. So what I'm talking about this time is a new study published in JAMA Internal Medicine. And it was an observational study where they looked at 6 different trials. And I wrote a little article about it on dietdoctor.com. And what was interesting is the way it was covered. There was an article in CNN where the headline was, meat's not good for you again, basically. But they quoted some people. The first person they quoted said the increase in absolute risk is so small that it is unlikely to be relevant for the individual. Unlikely to be relevant for the individual. But then they go on to quote the author as saying, our study shows the link to cardiovascular disease and mortality was robust. Sounds like somebody needs a little bit of a reality check there about what is relevant and what is robust. So this study, like a lot of observational studies, just followed people the way they were normally living, had them fill out food frequency questionnaires, which we know is a pretty inaccurate way to get data about what you've been eating. And then they just follow who gets heart disease, who doesn't, who lives, who dies, and they crunched the data to try and find an association. So what they concluded was that there was an association with eating more red meat and more processed meat and the risk of dying or having cardiovascular disease. So the first question you have to ask yourself in an observational trial like this is how robust were the findings? I mean, that author used the word robust. Well, for comparison, they look at a relative risk, meaning how much more likely was someone eating meat to have heart disease than someone not? What was the relative risk? Well, when it comes to smoking, that sort of set the standard for relative risk for getting cancer in an observational trial where it was 30. Not 1.30, but 30. And in this study, what was it? It was 1.1. 1.07, 1.03. These were the relative risks. I mean, these are minuscule. And Dr. Andrew Menti wrote a little tweet about it. I remember the day when a 1.03 was insignificant and not something to talk about. But now it's getting headlines. And the reason why is because it's such a razor-thin, minuscule difference between those who had the most red meat and the least red meat. Such a minuscule difference that there's almost no chance that it was really due to the red meat, especially when you look at the breakdown of the people. Those who ate more red meat were more likely to be men, and the same for processed meat as well. More likely to be men, more likely to smoke, more likely to drink alcohol, and more likely to have other unhealthy characteristics. And here's the other thing. They ate 1,100 calories more per day than the people who were eating the lowest amount of meat. 1,100 calories per day. Now, do you think that was all broccoli and steak? Probably not. There's probably a lot of other stuff going in there that is not very healthy for them. So I don't see how there's any way we can say this study shows anything relevant to you as an individual about the risk of eating red meat or processed meat. Okay, but I started this by saying that there are actually some positives. I haven't really said a lot of positives yet, have I? No, I haven't. But here are the positives, because we can directly put this in comparison, in juxtaposition to the studies that came out last October that we also wrote about on dietdoctor.com. I wrote about the one on red meat, and Adele Height wrote about the one on processed meat. And those studies looked at quality of evidence. They used the GRADE, G-R-A-D-E criteria to look at quality of evidence to see what the highest quality of evidence shows. And their conclusion was there is no high quality evidence supporting the link between red meat, processed meat, and cardiovascular disease or death. And in fact, the only evidence that supported it was very low quality evidence. So I think what this study does, it's the perfect highlight of how a misrepresentation and a misinterpretation of very poor quality evidence can lead to conclusions that may be popular for some, may confirm somebody's bias, or may help them promote their agenda, but has nothing to do with quality science and nothing to do with helping you decide, what should I eat? Or helping me as a clinician decide, what should I recommend for you to eat? Because studies like this really have no meaningful impact. So We're going to keep pointing these out. We've pointed them out again and again. And as long as they keep getting published and keep getting headlines, we're going to keep debunking them and making sure you understand the difference. I hope there would come a day where the journals are going to realize that these studies are essentially meaningless to individuals and stop publishing them. Maybe that's dreaming. Maybe that's being too naive, but hopefully that day will come. In the meantime, check out dietdoctor.com where you can see the articles and a little more in-depth information about this. Make sure you click subscribe below so you'll get all our video updates. Have a great day, everybody.